we know that some of you have already taken this course, but today is your lucky day because this year we introduced a completely new activity, which we are very excited about. No one has seen it before, so it should be interesting. But you know, everything comes at a cost in life, and before we get to that activity, you will have to spend 15 minutes listening to my lecture. Sorry, life is not fair, but that's just how it is. So is it a deal? Okay, let's do it. My lecture is about, obviously from this picture, producing fire with your hands. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. It's about sensing temperature. Don't forget that that's a course in sensory physiology. Yesterday we talked about general concepts of senses, and we covered vision. Today we will start talking about the sense of touch. Keep in mind that while we casually say the sense of touch, but scientists use a different name for it, a broader term. They say Somato Sensation. Somato from ancient Greek means what? Not quite. Not quite. Come on, I'm sure someone here speaks ancient Greek. No? Well, I don't blame you. It's pretty useless language. But okay, somato means bodily, by the body. So it means sensing by the body. And the reason we use this broader term is because the sense of touch includes not only touch as such. Oh, I made a rhyme. Did you hear that? It's a poem.
Use that next time.
Yeah. But it also includes things like pressure, vibration, pain, warm and cold. So we need a broader term for that. But today we're only talking about warm and cold. So how do we sense warm and cold? Let's refresh our conceptual schematic. We need receptors, sensory pathways, and the center in the brain to sense temperature. And now let's look at what structures in the body play these roles. And I will tell you a little more details about them. So our main player, the receptor for sensing warm and cold, is the sensory neuron. But it's not that simple, because sensory neuron is actually located very far from the skin. Its body, remember how we talked about how neurons have cell body and have processes. So the cell body is located near your spinal cord in the structure called dorsal root ganglion. Here it is another picture of this dorsal root ganglion. This is your spinal cord, and here is this also called DRG. DRG is just basically a lump of tissue which contains hundreds of neurons. Here's a cross-section of the DRG. All these circles are different sensory neurons. And then they send processes to your skin where they end up near the surface of the skin and they form something called free nerve endings. And it is these free nerve endings that are the touch receptors. This is how they look like in real life. This is a preparation of human skin. It's a very thin slice of human skin, which is stained by special dyes so that we can see what's in there. And here is a real ending of a nerve, of a neuron. And this is what senses warm and cold temperature. We have many of these neurons. As you saw, there are hundreds of neurons, and they go to every spot on your skin. They cover the whole body. But each neuron can sense only a little part of the skin, as shown here. So here you see 3 different sensory neurons in the skin, and they cover a little spot which is called the receptive field. The receptive field is the area on the skin that is sensed by one neuron. So we see 3 receptive fields here. This is the structure of how we sense warm and cold. But now I'd like you to remember that the purpose of this course is not only to give you the knowledge about senses, but also to show you how scientists obtain this knowledge. And I would like to walk you through the process how scientists solved one of the puzzles in how we sense warm and cold. So please bear with me. And this puzzle is this. We know that our skin can sense warm and cold temperature. And it also contains several neurons. But can each neuron sense both cold and warm? Or is it that this one can only sense warm, and this one can only sense cold, and this one senses something else? So this was a big puzzle in this field. let me explain this a little in greater detail. There are actually two possibilities how this can work. And in science, we call these models, alternative models for how things can happen. There are two possibilities. So let's look at the first model first. Imagine this is a surface of your finger. This is the skin of your finger. It has two neurons. And then we touch a cube of ice, and we feel cold. So in this model, both these neurons get activated. They're capable of... Oh, yes, go.
Oh, yeah, actually, just keep going. So say something now.
Are you sure?
Yes, fine.
Okay. So in this model, both neurons, they are capable of responding to cold temperature. They get activated, and they transmit the signal to the brain that it's cold, and we feel cold. Then if we touch something hot, like a burning candle, again, both these neurons are capable of sensing warm temperature. They are able to distinguish what they're sensing. And now they send the signal that they're touching hot, and we will feel hot. That's one model. In this model, you can notice that these neurons are sort of like jacks of all trades. They're multifunctional. They can sense both cold and warm and somehow encode it and transmit to the brain. But that's just one possibility. There is another possibility how this can work. Oh, and by the way, since these can sense both warm and cold, we will call them just temperature receptors. But here's a different possibility. Again, we will call this our second model. We are touching an ice cube. One neuron is capable of responding to cold temperature, and it gets activated, so we feel cold. But the other neuron is incapable of responding to cold temperature, so it stays silent. But one is enough to transmit information about cold, so we feel cold. And we will call this neuron a cold receptor because it's specific for cold temperature. And then when we touch a burning candle, another neuron now gets activated because it's capable of responding to warm temperature. And now our cold receptor is silent because it can only respond to cold. And again, one is enough to sense cold. And we will call this warm receptor. So these are our two models. They both should work. And I want to ask you, which do you think is the correct one? Please turn on your remotes and vote. We just have two options, A or B. How many people are participating? I guess all 15. Okay. 2 more people. Make your choice. Check that your remote is on. Okay, well, maybe we have just 14. Okay, well, let's look at what you think. Oh, interesting. Okay, most of you think it's model 1. Can anyone try maybe to explain why do you think, or you just made a guess? That's optional, but maybe you have some thoughts why you're sure that it's the first one and not the second. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Because I feel like, because temperature is just like the measure of like energy in one spot. So if your neuron can just measure how much energy, like if there's an absence of energy or an increase in energy, I feel like it should be able to do both.
That's a very good point. I like that. Yeah, theoretically, it should convert the energy into signal, and there should be a way to somehow encode this signal. So yeah, it should work. Okay, but we really need to get to the truth. How do we do this? We need to do some experiment that will produce different outcomes for these two models so that we can see the difference. Then we can observe the outcome and tell which model is correct. So can you think about an experiment that can test these two models? Yeah.
Maybe just take one neuron and see if it takes both the cold and the hot.
Oh my God, that's such a beautiful idea. That's exactly correct. So, but I will walk you through that. So the problem here is that we are using a very large stimulus, which affects both neurons, just like a big cube of ice or like fire. But what if we were able to apply our stimulus to only one of them? Imagine we had a metal wire, but by the way, these receptive fields are very small. They're like 1-2 millimeter in diameter. So imagine we had a metal wire that we heated up, and then we could touch a very small spot on the finger. Let's examine what would happen for both these models. Let's say we're touching this spot. What would the person feel? Hot. The person will feel hot. Okay. What if we touch a different spot on the skin? What will the person feel? Probably hot. Okay, so notice that when in this model, wherever you touch, it's always hot. every point on the skin senses hot. But now let's examine this model. What if you touch here? The person feels hot. Okay, and now dramatic music. Ta-da-da-dum. That's the best I can do. Sorry for for singing, but the person will feel nothing, right? Because this neuron is not capable of responding to warm temperature. So you can notice that in this model, you will start touching your skin, and you will find that some spots are just like numb. They cannot feel warmth. Okay, so now based on your own experience, now you see that these two models are predicting two very different things. Based on your experience, which model do you think is correct now? Do you think every spot on your skin can sense hot temperature or not? Or you have some numb spots in your skin? Please vote which model is correct. Okay, 14. Thank you. Let's look what you think. Oh, okay. Wow, you're a tough crowd. Still, most people think that it's A. That the correct answer is A, that you can feel with every possible point on your skin. Well, lucky for you, I just walked you through the process of thinking of this guy. It's a Swedish scientist, Magnus Blix, about 1.5 centuries ago. And that's exactly how he thought. And he decided to test it. So he developed a device like this, just a jar with cold water, a flask with warm water, and then they have tubing, and it goes to this one single metal point. And he started touching his skin with this tip at very systematically, row by row, column by column. And he made a map of the skin on his different places on his body, but for example, here is his forearm, just a 1/2-inch spot on his skin. And he found that some of the spots can feel only cold, some spots can feel only warm, and then there are large areas that are numb, which was, I guess, unexpected. And very rarely did he find spots that would feel both warm and cold. This is a real experiment. You can do it yourself. It's good to be skeptical in science. You have to. You shouldn't trust everyone. You should test everything. So I encourage you to try doing this experiment yourself. But okay, so now that you know about this experiment, I will ask you to vote the third time. What is the correct model now based on that experiment? Thank you. Okay, 14 answers. Okay, well, good job. I'm happy I was able to change your mind a little bit, but 5 people still don't believe me, and that's fine. And that's fine, but I have to say that more experiments later confirmed that the model 1 is unfortunately wrong.
Yes.
The model 2 is correct.
I thought it was a trick question.
It
wasn't a trick question. In fact, we do have cold spots on our skin and warm spots, and that's because some neurons can only sense warm and some neurons can only sense cold. And in fact, yes?
Don't they just sense the absence of heat? Because it's not really cold, it's just less hot. That's what I was thinking.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Because like heat's taken away, like put ice cube in your hand,
Mm-hmm.
it's taken away from your body.
Mm-hmm.
Cold put in. So
Yeah, that
it's
would
just less hot.
make
It's just hot and less hot. It's not really cold.
that would make sense from the physics standpoint, but it just happens that we do have some nerves that are activated by absence of energy. I agree with you that it's, that's a very good question, because even scientists are puzzled how this happens. But there are we will talk about that more later. There are receptors that produce electricity when you remove heat from them. So it's always from the neutral. Our body thinks that at about 30 degrees Celsius, our body is at neutral, and if you go higher, some neurons will get activated. If it goes lower, also other neurons will get activated. So that's just how it works. And now we know that this was confirmed with many other experiments, for example, by recording electricity from each of neurons from here and applying cold. And indeed, it confirms that some sense only warm, some sense only cold. Although I have to say that there are some small groups of neurons that can sense several different stimuli, but that's kind of a special situation. And we also know that there are more cold receptors than warm receptors, interestingly. It's not clear why. And cold receptors are more superficial than warm receptors. So that's how we, yes?
Is it found that maybe people from warmer climates have more of a certain receptor, or is it just in the general sort of?
I'm not sure, but I've never heard about something like that, so I would assume that no. But this is just a part of the whole system. There's also a lot of processing in the brain, so I think that maybe some people can be more cold sensitive or warm sensitive, just the way their brain works. There was someone who asked a question before you. I'll ask you later. Yes, you had a question.
When people can't feel pain, does that have to do with the receptors?
Yes, exactly, and I will get to that a little later.
So what if I put an ice cube on my hand and then it turns numb? What's going on there?
Oh, that's wow. That's a little too advanced, but that's a great question. I was just talking about how the electricity is created in this tip, but then the electricity also needs to get transmitted along this. It's like an electrical wire,
Yeah.
and then it turns out that there are some other things in the nerve that only work at normal temperature, and if it's cold, they just shut down. They cannot work. Just like, I guess, have you ever noticed that cell phones sometimes, like, they stop working when it's very, very cold? The battery is drained and stuff like that. And that can happen too, but I guess that's another problem. But usually just everything moves more slowly. Electricity works worse at cold temperature.
Well, I thought it was better because it, a superconductor.
Oh.
Put it down really fast and it's a.
Okay.
That's different though.
That's a good point, but the superconductor, it's a temperature like minus 200 Celsius.
Yeah.
So it's a,
current passes easier through it. It's less resistant.
that's also true, yeah, but that's like completely different conditions, and also that's for the metal wire. For the biological wire, it would not have this thing. Okay, guys, we need to move on because all great question. I'm happy you're asking so many questions, but we have a lot of stuff to cover today. So, interesting thing about these things is that these two neurons look the same, but they function in a different way. Cold receptors will, if you look at the activity at different temperatures, cold receptors will get activated at low temperature, warm receptors will get activated by warm temperature. And the next question is, what I like about science is that science is a lot like playing with these things. Do you know what these things are? Russian nesting dolls, right?
Oh yeah.
So you open one and there's another one like that. So science is like that. You can always look deeper and ask new questions. So the next question to ask here is why these things are different. What makes them respond these to cold and these to warm? And to answer that, we need to go even deeper and look at the tip of this nerve ending in the skin. If we zoom in on the edge, we will find that it has a membrane which contains proteins called ion channels. Have you heard about proteins and ion channels? Is that idea clear? Okay. Where do proteins come in our body?
Proteins from the cells that make the protein.
Yeah, so they're made in our body. What are they made of? Or rather, how does the body know to make them?
The amino acids.
Right, but the instructions for making the proteins come from the molecule called DNA, correct? DNA encodes all our proteins, and it's separated into these wards called genes, which contain the instructions to make proteins. And now the biggest question, one of the biggest questions in biology, is to identify what protein does what, which can be opened by warm temperature, which can be opened by cold temperature. And this is very important because if you have a problem with one protein, you can get really sick. For example, a news report about a rare disease that makes this girl unable to feel pain. A very poor girl, you see, if her lunch is cold and hot, she'll gulp it down anyway. And this is because one of her proteins that usually opens in response to painful stimuli, like something sharp, it always stays closed. Yes?
Is it only like pain, or like if she was to touch something she would feel?
This particular girl only doesn't feel pain, but depending on what protein is the problem, there are people who cannot feel cold or warm or
like
pain.
If she sat down, she would feel that she was in a chair, but if she got stabbed, she wouldn't feel it.
For this particular person, but it depends on which protein. And today we will actually see how scientists are trying to identify which protein, for example, opens by warm or cold. While doing that, you will have the opportunity to see our lab, our equipment, and how we actually answer scientific questions using science.